I met Aura Mckay in the early days of Vancouver Photo Workshops. Aura, Mark, and myself were among the very small group that started that school and began having the most interesting conversations about photography, composition, how to learn photography, and how to teach photography. Aura was always energetic and always had her own interesting ways of explaining the technology or the techniques of what she's doing. It's really great to be able to catch up with Aura just in the middle of this kind of crazy COVID stuff and see what she's up to. She's moved into a solo-preneur sort of approach to things and is offering a lot of workshops and classes for creatives trying to find their direction. So please sit back and enjoy while we catch up and talk about how limiting your technology can maybe increase your creativity. It's been about 5 to 6 years since I have really caught up with Aura, and I'm very happy to have her as a guest on whatever this series or whatever this is that I'm doing. Conversations with photographers, in this case, photographers and old friends. So, hi Aura, nice to see you.
Hello, Six. Great to see you too. I must say your beard is looking fantastic these days.
Yeah, yeah. And I said, let's not talk about COVID, but I can't help this beard right now. It just keeps growing. And this is pretty crazy too. I haven't had this much hair in years. So,
I know it's like thank goodness you got a really good fade before it
yeah,
came in. Yeah, and
exactly.
I'm still pretty grateful for my gray stripes too. But
Yeah.
it has been a long time. It has been a long time. Lots of changes going on for all of us over 5 and 6 years. It's extraordinary. I think when we look retrospectively at 5 years, a decade, 2 decades, 2.5 decades
Yeah. Yep.
in practicing our craft, did I ever think I would be did I ever think I would have the journey that I took? And no, I did not think I would have the journey that I ended
No,
up.
and I think your journey is interesting. But let's start right back at the beginning and kind of talk about when and how you started photography. A little bit of a quick background on that.
Well, so like many people who are of the Generation X generation, when I was growing up, photography was something that was quite significant, quite like you only were photographed on special occasions, yeah, when you graduated, or maybe if a family member was really into photography, then maybe you would have pictures taken at other significant moments. And I remember that I was living with my dad and his wife at the time, and she had traveled on an African safari, and she had come back with slides from her safari. And it was my very favorite thing to do was to say, "Hey, can we have a slideshow? Can we have a slideshow?" And just looking at those images, I think that's where it started to impact me at that time, at age 10, to know that there was a tremendous power in a visual image. There was tremendous power in a photograph, tremendous power in a moment. And I'm not really sure, what I was thinking at that point, but I think that was the moment it started. And I got to travel when I was in my early 20s. I had gone the traditional route. I went to school and I got the jobs and everything, and I decided I was going to travel in my 20s. And that Six for me was my first camera. I got a point and shoot.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was
And
easy to travel with.
it was, but and this is in like 1993, 94.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
traveled for 18 months in the South Pacific and Southeast Asia. I had a little point and shoot camera. The only thing I could do with it was lock my focus so I could adjust my compositions a little bit.
Yeah.
And I could force the flash or suppress the flash. And that was it. That was the only thing I could do. I took 57 rolls of film in 18 months.
So, let's speak about you had the opportunity to do that and to travel. This was more than just an introduction into photography. This was kind of kicking down that door to really let you into the world of, the business of photography, really, as well. Correct? You were doing this.
The business business aspect of, well, yes and no. So two parts of that. Yeah, like I was able to travel because I had saved up a significant amount of money, and I just said, "That's it. I'm just going to go and be in the world." And this is like, you got to remember, this is in the '90s. This is pre-internet, pre-email,
Yeah.
pre-Facebook, pre-influencer. It was a very different world to go and travel with a backpack and do that world then. And the drive was for the travel, not for the photography. And the interesting thing was that when I returned, the drive was for the photography, not for the travel.
Yeah.
And the act of creating again and again, consistently over time for that period of 18 months, really anchored for me that tool and medium of self-expression. I was able, because the consistency of practicing it for a very, very long time got me to a place of using it as a tool of self-expression. The business aspect, pre-travel, I was an accountant. I know, let it sink for a little minute. Just financial accountant.
Yeah.
Yep. I had been working accounts payable, letters S to Z for a big union corporation. Really exciting and creative. And then post-travel, I actually completed my marketing communications diploma. So I've been educated in business and worked in business for a large part of my career. And I think that gave me a very distinct advantage when moving into being a professional photographer as a entrepreneur. It really changed how I was able to approach that process.
Extremely. I mean, this is something I talk to a lot of artists who generally have, like, try and do this the other way. We start with it being an art and then realize we have to somehow make a business out of this, and we have no idea. I went to university, so I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Windsor. I don't really think we had business classes to really, you had classes on how to write for proposals and for grants, and that's kind of where, in the art world, you're expected to, get a lot of your funds and a lot of your money. It really wasn't, hey, there's fine art that you can sell, or you can travel and do photography. But I want to roll back to that a little bit. Since you really love to control numbers and you love the details, obviously, catching on to things like, third stops, half stops, and F stops were pretty easy for you. But how do you?
So an accountant, lover of details, love numbers.
Yeah, but how do you think?
I tell you, aperture took me about 2 years to really nail it, and learning.
Well, good, because accounting has still got me fucking blah.
Say it again.
I said accounting has still got me all messed up. So it's okay. It took you 2 years. It's still taking me like 40 years for accounting.
Well, so here's the thing with aperture. The whole thing about it being this an F ratio, and it's there's a function of the diameter of the lens over the. I could not get it. The idea that f2.8 was a bigger aperture than f22, I could not get that stuff. So what I did is I relied on my performance background, and I created a song.
Oh my God, are you gonna sing? Because this was the stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to ruin your show,
it's not a show. It's just conversations. Yep.
This is conversation. So the whole thing was, and this really helped when I moved into teaching photography as well, because sometimes the math of photography is really challenging for people. And I like, one of the things that I love the most about the craft of photography is that it's taking math and science and transforming it into art and creativity.
Yeah.
Like, how cool is that? It's incredible. And so you would think that with my math background, I would embrace it, but I had to actually create a song to remember the fact that a bigger F number means bigger depth of field. So F22 is going to give me more depth of field than F2.8. So a smaller F number gives me smaller depth of field. So the bigger the F, the bigger the depth, the smaller the F, the smaller the depth, the bigger the F, the bigger the depth, the smaller the F, the smaller the depth.
Should we have a little bumping sing along
Yeah,
for this? Yeah, a little
like,
bouncy ball. Well, so we got to split this really. I want to come back to our songs and teaching, but
there's another one. If you were really lucky, I'll give you a bonus second song at the end.
yeah, that might be in the bonus features of this. But let's tie this right back into the beginning. If it was such a hard thing for you to kind of grasp onto at the beginning, how do you think that the little point and shoot kind of opened up that creativity for you right away? Instead of it being the math and all the science, you had something in your hand that gave you as close to an instantaneous picture as our iPhones would. I mean, or a Polaroid, with a lack of control.
And then I had to look at the negative. Like, oh my God, developing film while traveling in Southeast Asia in the early 90s was a whole other adventure.
Yeah.
But you're right, Six, in pointing to the fact that because I wasn't overwhelmed by technology, or I wasn't, right up against having to make technical decisions, I was able to move directly into that creative self-expression. And I think that, our iPhones, our camera phones have really allowed people to shortcut into how can I get close enough, or how can I start using this tool, this instant gratification, instant feedback loop tool. And I think that was really helpful for me. And when I was teaching photography, I saw it all the time, where people would come into an introduction to, and you saw it. I mean, we were teaching the same classes, right?
Yes, yeah.
Where people come in to an intro to photography class thinking that they were all that and a bag of chips. And then 2 classes in, they'd be like, oh my God, photography's hard.
I had no idea. Yeah. Yeah.
And they'd actually become worse photographers while they were learning how to actually master the craft than they were when they were just going for pure self-expression. So, I think, but one of the advantages that I think that I have is that I did go to full-time photography school. So when I got back from traveling,
right,
I wanted to pursue photography, and I actually got hired by a digital image making company in 2000. So this was at the right
at the beginning of it.
Technology coming up. Like, we had the old Nikon 995s that looked like a VHS tape, and they kind of like, they split around like a little sandwich thing. And I got hired by them based on a portfolio of work that I curated from those 57 rolls of film. I put 18 pictures out of those 57 rolls into a portfolio and got hired to travel around the world making 360-degree virtual reality stock images of vacation destinations and hotel properties, having never used a DSLR or SLR camera. Never had I picked up a real camera in my life.
Right. And this is a little bit speaking to kind of the point of all this. I mean, the technology that you put in your hands, I mean, is sometimes you got to learn the tool, but you already had a lot of the different parts in order to be able to play that role already. You had traveled, you understood the accounting of it, you understood the finances of it, you understood, licensing, and even all of that sort of stuff is for some people is really, when they're getting into it and they get these opportunities, isn't something that they have common knowledge of.
And I will say that I had an additional advantage in that I didn't have to get the gigs. I didn't have to do the contracts. I didn't have to negotiate payment. I didn't have to do any of the back-end business things because I was a subcontractor. So I still had to boots on the ground, figure out my logistics and travel and organize the production once I was on the ground there, which, those kinds of skills are super valuable in terms of photography, but it wasn't, and it was absolutely a combination of having an eye and having the skill set to manage the travel and logistics of it, and the willingness to learn new technology. That was sort of the magic formula for me. And really, really blessed that I didn't have to figure out the hustle part of, okay, well, how am I going to get a gig in New Orleans for March? And how am I going to
Yeah.
get a second gig in New Orleans for March to make traveling there? And oh crap, why am I going to New Orleans in March when it's March Madness and Mardi Gras? Like, whoops, that was a mistake. So I didn't have to do any of that kind of stuff, which was really, really great. But it only lasted a year.
Well, that,
Because
yeah, these are short-lived sometimes.
it was the business model, and this is interesting because a lot of people think that you can just pick one business model and that's going to see you through a 20 or 30-year career, and that's not the case. Over the last couple of decades, I've adjusted my business model many times in response to what's been happening in the marketplace. We have to. And so in 2000, the company I was working for was contracted out to all these .com companies, which there was a boom in 2000.
Yep.
And then 2001, the .com industry went doggone. My job was gone, and that's when I went back to school. And Sticks, that's where I think you and I both bring a really strong advantage into our career in terms of our understanding and mastery of our craft. Your fine art degree and my going back to school in 2001 and learning how to do things like use a large format camera and calculate shine prog and do all of that kind of stuff
And get super geeky about it, right? I mean,
well, and that's where I was like right up against my challenge with figuring out aperture and shutter speeds and inverse square laws and all those kinds of things.
so how at what year is this kind of in your history of photography? Is this 5 years into it? Like, give us a kind of round.
No. So 90, 94, 95,
Right.
I was traveling around Southeast Asia,
Okay.
South Pacific. 99, I got a job with VRX Studios
Yep.
to travel around the world and take great photos. 2001, I went to school. So I had really handled an SLR camera maybe 4 or 5 times before I went to full-time photography school. It was right at the beginning of my career. And I love that as a career path. If I were to give someone advice, I would say, photograph for a while till you're sure you really love it, because you're going to do a lot of it, and then go get a really strong foundation of your craft, and then wing it for about a year and a half or 2 years of just seeing how you can do based on instinct and grit, and then take a business course.
Okay, so the first 2 steps I think that you had there, I think is what people are missing. Because when you say go out and do photograph and practice and see if you love to do it, we're kind of remembering that as the days of putting rolls of film into the camera and giving time and spending money and making considerations about what frame. You say that to somebody now and they spend a weekend and blow through 3,000 nature pictures and some pictures of their friends at a party, and they say, well, this is kind of what I want to do. This is totally great. And, hey, I sold like one party photo to the party guy, and look, I'm making money already. So I think that there is, again, we talk about accessibility, back to kind of the phone thing. It's a really great thing. It could be a double-edged sword sometimes. But also it's shifted a lot of how we handle things. I mean, we had the opportunity to do a lot of different things with our career because digital opened up a lot of different things. But having a foundation where time and consideration for what you shoot, this is some of the stuff I think I'm really interested in talking about, because it's changed for me where I put my time and what I shoot, how I shoot. Maybe changed because of the market, maybe changes because of now I have a family. And you even said you have plenty of different ways that your career has changed over time.
Mostly my business model and the subject that I choose to shoot. My style and approach to photography has been pretty consistent. But what I will say is that 20 years ago and more, the act of capturing an image was incredibly more challenging. There was huge barriers to entry. Even capturing an image and producing an actual image, whether it was a negative or a slide or a print, that whole process was hugely challenging.
Yeah. Yep.
Now what we've found is that whole process There's almost no barrier to entry. Creating an image is almost instantaneous, which I think has just shifted the burden. Where the consideration and a lot of that happens is now in selecting the images that you're going to show. So I think the place where people have the biggest opportunity to actually hone their skills now is not in the capture, but rather in edit. And I think that's where people are doing. They're blowing through those 3,000 images. Sure, I shoot a lot.
Yeah.
Like I shoot a lot. I'm an overshooter. I have a heavy trigger finger. I don't think there's a problem with that. Where I think the challenge is that they're not going into those 3,000 images and picking 4.
Right. Yeah.
They're not doing that piece. So whether you front load your consideration in the beginning or you put it during the selection process where you're actually choosing the image or the frame that is going to tell the story.
Yes.
I think when we do that consideration is a lot more in the.
I think that the newer considerations are probably uninformed. So let's try. Let's go back. Who are you influenced by? Who is your influence for your style and your eye, and kind of what drove the creativity for it? You said that stays pretty consistent. Well, that stuff.
I think my approach to how I actually capture the image is pretty consistent.
Okay.
In terms of, I kind of photograph how I talk. Like I don't use a tripod. I use a 35mm SLR camera.
You sing and you dance, yes.
I'm going to sing and dance. Yep. I'm going to get happy. Like I use a 24 to 105 lens. That's me. Like I'm very bare bones. I am like a run and gun shooter in terms of how I am always looking. I'm very responsive. I don't pre-visualize things. I don't want to do a location scout. I don't want to meet you beforehand. I really love that right in my face, have to make a picture right now. That's when I thrive the most. So that process has stayed the same. But I would say in terms of understanding my style, I don't think I was able to really understand my style until, and I hate this answer, 6. I hated this answer when I was in school. I hated this answer. It took 10 years.
Yeah. Yep.
And I am an overachiever. I did 7 portfolios for my graduation. 7.
Yeah.
I got 7 A's on my portfolios. Like I am the world's overachiever here when it comes to my photography career. And I thought, well, I'm going to figure it out in 5 years. It took about 10 years, and it took 10 years and then me going back and reviewing what I had done. And what I discovered was that, especially for the first sort of 0 to 5 years, the images that I would select from a shoot were not actually my best work from the shoot. They were the ones that most looked like somebody else's picture.
Okay, good. Yes. So speak to me about what for you takes your regular image from just being an image. What makes you select your image out of those 3,000 images? What does it when you're looking at your images and you're making those selections for yourself?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it is different now, 20 plus years in than it was in my first decade. It definitely is a different process. I know some of the themes that I explore frequently. And so I look for those themes because those are my themes. That's my style, my self-expression. So some of the themes you'll see in my images are, I really push the boundary of the rule of thirds. I like the rule of fifths. I really like lots of
edges of frames.
Yeah. Super low horizons. You won't see a lot of people in my images. Most of my images, you're going to see a single solitary figure. When you look even at my nude work, and if you want to be showing some images,
I can pop this up in the background. So go ahead and tell me which gallery we should be looking at.
This is my business site for my business coaching, and if you just go to mckayphotographer.com, you will actually see my photos.
You're gonna make me type live on this thing, eh?
No, that's all right. I'm talking, and nobody will see it.
Nobody does see this. That's the best part about it.
So a lot of my images, what you'll see is a single solitary figure or a single shape with lots of negative space around it. You'll see juxtaposition is one of the things that I use a lot in my images. So you'll see, like, even in that, my boundaries are pushed. So I think when I'm like shape and negative space, you're starting to see these themes come up again and again. So when I'm looking for an image out of 3,000, I'm looking for, does this feel like something that I would create and put out there in the world?
And that obviously changes depending on the project, because you do commercial work and then you do artwork for yourself. So
Yeah, you know what? One of the most frustrating things for me for a very long time was that when I was doing work with people, so when I was photographing, headshots or portraits or even intimate portraiture or nudes and figure work or corporate headshots, anytime I was photographing people, I got to a place where I felt confident with the images that I loved and I thought were really strong. And I would present them all full of excitement and enthusiasm. I'd be like, here they are. And these are my favorites at the beginning. And they would never pick my favorites. Like, the images that I love of them, they pick something else. And I was really confused by that for a really long time.
yeah, that whole thing with digital, everybody wanted to see their images right away. Can I see on the back of the camera? And that really kind of changed the way that we were able to do the work. And it really does. I think, again, it can help you have great connections with your subjects, and you can have it can create mountains out of molehills, out of things that aren't going to be an issue in a final image, and all that they can see are those of those flaws of them. Yeah, a lot of portraits, a lot of time trying to figure out how to work with people who don't want to be in front of a camera.
Over time, I developed, and again, it's over time, I developed an understanding about the things that I was responding to were quirkiness or uniqueness in expression, and people want to look like magazines for the most part. The people that I was photographing, and so they wanted to be less quirky in their images. So I learned that there was one edit which was going to be for the client and one edit that was my own. And I created a whole system that was like, I'm going to have my star system for my clients, and the ones that they choose, they get a red label, but the star system is for me. So my favorites are in my catalog, and I know which ones the client chooses, but they're usually not what I would say was aligned with my style. And the images that I chose for corporate, so when I was doing commercial jobs and doing things like hotels and architectural interiors and stuff like that, that was a much easier edit to do.
Yeah.
That was a much easier edit. Although the capture of it was
yep.
I know, it was like I'd move the camera like half an inch and take another shot, and half an inch and take another shot, and it took a long time for me to get the confidence in terms of what is my perspective going to be for those
art. Yeah.
Very different depending on the shoots, for sure.
So
for sure.
A little question just about you said you had the confidence to choose those images that were right for you, that may not have been what the client or what the subject wanted at that point. We had a lot of workshops at Vancouver Photo Workshops. You and I were both really lucky to be involved with a great thing. And we had photographers that came from all over the world. Is there any photographer or workshop that you think kind of informed you extremely in the way that you approach even your choices of those portraits, or what you would deem to be the most successful portraits?
Whoa. So that's a big question, Six, because as you say, our involvement in Vancouver Photo Workshops and being part of that incredible time here in Vancouver, it was like a really amazing time, and the 104 Collective and a lot of the other things that we were doing with Van Arts, we got exposed to a lot of really amazing, iconic photographers, and had the privilege of learning from a lot of them. And so, which were the most influenced? I'm going to say that there were two that were big influencers on me. One was Gregory Heisler.
Okay. I wouldn't have chose that one for you, but okay. But it makes sense. Yeah, go. Yeah.
I'll tell you the reason why
Yeah.
Gregory High School was because one of the things he taught me was to turn off the lights
Mm-hmm.
and to turn them back on one by one. And the way that he taught me to see light differently, and it may have just been that I had, I'd already talked to like Joe McNally, and I'd already had this, and I had a background of stuff that made him be like a pivotal moment. But there was a way of he takes very different images than I take. He creates very different images than I create. But his process of approaching a camera, and that each decision was integral to the end image. Like even choosing a 35 millimeter camera, choosing my lens, choosing the aperture, choosing the shutter speed, choosing the light quality, the quantity, the direction, all of it, each decision before you press that shutter button, it contributes to the overall expression. And I had kind of been, up until that point, kind of breezing through a lot of those decisions, maybe because I started with a point and shoot.
Yeah.
And maybe because we all just want to get to the creation part. Maybe I was still driven by that, but he really had me slow down and consider my choices. And the second one is very odd as well, because the way that she influenced me was very, very interesting. Would be Mary Ellen Mark.
Yes, I knew that one.
And I would say her. Why do you think her?
Because I think she embodied everything that a confident New York photographer would embody. And she was a fucking powerhouse. Like, it was sit down, listen, shut up, and I will tell you. And most of the time, you got to those situations in your critique where you were probably broken down enough. You thought all your images sucked shit, and she'd pull out one and she'd talk about it, or she'd kind of maybe crop into things, but she kind of liked her images the way they were, and she'd pull out those images and she'd talk to you about it, and she'd have a connection that you sometimes I don't think would see. But that was my interaction with her. How was yours?
So I love Mary Ellen Mark's work. I still love it. I think it's incredible and extraordinary and very, very intimate for this kind of documentary street style portraiture. Yeah. And, so one of the things that she said to me when we first went into here was, she said, and as you say, in a very forceful, very, powerhouse kind of way, my assignment was I was not allowed to photograph anybody smiling.
Yeah, okay. I'd see that.
Now, hang on a minute. I am shiny, happy people.
Yeah.
I am bright, vibrant colors. I am enthusiastic and uplifting and all those kinds of things. And my assignment was I can't photograph anybody who was smiling. And so I had a lot of resistance to that. But her positioning of it was that smiles can be masks. And so if you ask someone to smile for a photograph and it's not a genuine expression, that smile masks that genuine capture of that personality. So I understood her point, and then she had me do a self-portrait, a portrait of my best friend, and a portrait of my mother.
Yep, I remember those.
Those images that I created during that workshop were some of the most powerful photographs that I have ever taken. And I will never photograph like that again in my life. That is not the voice that I want to bring to the world. It was super valuable. You can see I'm still emotionally touched by those photographs that I created. They're incredible. They're great. Not beautifully aesthetically, but in terms of their impact.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for Mary Ellen for pushing me to use my photographic voice and my self-expression to try on that way of talking through visuals. And no, it was really pivotal because it made it very clear to me that that was not the kind of photography that I wanted to make, even though I love it. I love looking at it. I think it's amazing, but it's like that. And for me, that was one of those times when I was like, oh, I have a choice on what my voice is. Oh, part of choosing my style and choosing which images I share in the world is really about what am I contributing to that visual conversation? What am I contributing to the zeitgeist or that conversation in photography, in imagery, in the world right now? And is that really what I want to be using my creative voice to say?
That's a lot of good answers, so I can probably strike off a few questions there. But how do you find now that you try and connect with your excuse me, with your clients, with your subjects? What is it? How do you work to get those authentic moments that you feel are now your kind of brand, or you?
Well, interesting that you ask, because in my mind, I retired my photography business about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, I still have a handful of clients that I work with, and interestingly, they're my least creative clients. They are things like Genome BC and the Michael Smith Foundation for Health and Research, and they're these like superpowers in terms of science and technology, and I love photographing for them, because for me, my camera was also my ticket in.
Yeah.
Being a photographer got me into places that I would never have been able to get into had I not been a photographer. And just so for me, I think that lost my train of thought there, because I was just thinking about playing with millionaires too, because being a photographer got me into the Entrepreneurs Organization, which is people that sell north of $1 million. And I was able to go and photograph those kinds of events and learn from them. So my current clients, I still like to learn from, and I'm still doing some headshots and stuff for them, or I was up until a couple of years ago. Interesting thing for me is that when I stopped really focusing on photography as a business, I moved away from photographing people as a main subject, and I moved back into really focusing on sort of the documentary street photography, kind of location storytelling, using photography as a visual journal for my own experience, those kinds of things. But I will tell you a story about directing people if you want me to tell you a story about directing people.
I'm up for stories, yeah. That's what it's all about. Go.
So I don't know if you're going to believe this or not, Stace, because I think by the time we started really working together and partnering, collaborating on photo shoots and doing those kinds of things, I think I'd already been photographing for at least like 10 years or something like that. Maybe 6 or 7, around 2006 or so.
Yep.
When I first started photographing, when I was in photography school, and people would come in to pose for me, the feedback that I got over and over and over again is that I don't talk enough.
Wow, that was early on.
I know. You're like, I think that must have been somebody else. So people would come in, and I was like you were saying about some of the barriers to learning photography and the math and all of the technical stuff. They would come in to work with me, and I was so concentrating on the light and the what aperture am I shooting at, and what's going to happen, and are they firing, and that I wasn't really engaging or interacting. And I had this belief that I wanted these natural looking expressions, so I'll just stand over here with my camera and go for it. You just go for it. Well, have you ever tried to look natural in front of a camera?
I look extremely natural in front of a camera.
I do this thing where I open my eyes really wide because I want to have big eyes in pictures, and it looks like somebody's goosed me. So it's there's nothing natural about it.
Is that a photographer look? I think I get the same thing. I think I'm trying to look through the lens at them and be like, are you getting the settings right? What are you doing? And then you're just like...
I micromanage the photographer on the other side.
Yeah.
So for me, learning how to manage my equipment, my medium, master the medium of photography, and have that sense of it just is a part of my brain and my body to have that camera in my hands and just have done the same kind of thing over and over and over again, that I don't have to think about it as much, gives me more bandwidth to be engaging, connecting, interacting. And it took a while of practicing how do I engage with people such that I'm coaching the candidates, that I'm helping and supporting them to have an authentic experience in front of my camera. And one of the early on things that I became committed to in all of my teachings was I am not taking pictures of people. I am making images with them. And when I approach photographing another human being or a couple as a collaborative process, as we're both bringing something to the equation to be able to co-create together, then I get amazing images. But if I'm over there I'm all the photographer and you guys are all just the peeps, then there is disconnect already implicit in the relationship, and it becomes obvious in the images.
At how many years in your career do you feel like you got that point that, let's just say, your training wheels come off? And
well, I would say it's almost less about years, although years do matter, but I think it's also about hours of practice of doing it.
Yes, yeah, that's fair. Yep. I was, and the reason I asked this is I was chatting with Puya the other day. And
one of our first students.
I know, one of our first students, and it was a great conversation, and we went back to Ralph Gibson visiting Vancouver Photo Workshops, and a conversation I had with him in a car, driving him back to the hotel afterwards, telling him how long I was in photography and how long I'd been shooting, and at that time was 15 years, and his answer was pretty quick, and he just said, well, you're almost there. And in talking with Puya the other day, he's like, I kind of reached that point at about 13 years in my career that things started to kind of, they started to make sense. And yeah, there is an hours, there's the, 10,000 hour theory, there's the tipping point, there is all that. I mean, if you really push at it, you aren't getting there quicker than still 7 or 10 years, a lot of times. But
and that's what I said earlier. We hate to hear it, but it took about 10 years for me to really find my style and really see it. And certainly, it had to do with the number of frames. And I think, too, in business, I think when you think about the business of photography, it takes time to photograph enough projects that you go, oh, I like these projects because, and I don't like these projects, and those are red flag projects, and I'm going to focus more on these projects. You have to collect data to be able to niche down. And I think one of the messages that is so harmful for, emerging professional photographers or people in sort of that first 1 to 3 years of their photography business is just, this relentless, you have to niche, you have to niche, you have to niche, you have to niche. And absolutely, if you're going to market something, you need to be clear and specific and focused in your marketing. I believe that for 0 to 3 years, a lot of what you're doing is gathering data. It's learning about the marketplace. It's going out and shoot everything. Go for it. Shoot it all. Have a headshot. Shoot a bar mitzvah. Go and do a hotel shoot. Shoot everything. Get the experience. And then use that data to be able to make better choices, just like we do in our creative expression. You take a whole bunch of pictures, you keep looking at them, and you keep looking at them, and you use that data, that experience of that visual information to be able to then make better and better choices.
Yeah, it's a long process, isn't it? And it
they're terrible, though.
Pardon me?
So here's what I think are shortcuts. So shortcuts are definitely about focused and consistent action. So you and I probably grew up with the same messaging in photography, where it was like sort of the Cartier-Bresson world of view, where put a 50 millimeter on your camera and don't take it off for a year.
Yeah, that was my other conversation with Ralph Gibson, was my shitty wide angle lens and his dislike for it. But yeah, 50s. Mm-hmm.
But that, we have other conversations about that
Mm-hmm.
experience. But the idea that, for a long time, the school of thought, when you wanted to learn how to be a photographer, was about learning to see how your camera sees. And the more you put that camera up to your face and you are aware of the decisions and choices you're making, the faster that accelerated learning happens.
Yeah.
So I would say yes, but if all you're doing is shooting, you're actually, I think nowadays, shortcutting almost 75% of the available learning for you. So I would say the shortcut is to be ruthless and diligent in your editing and review of your work.
Yeah.
Because we say the burden has shifted. A lot of the decisions people are making and the thoughtfulness and the consideration is shifted to post-production. So I would say
Right.
if you want to shortcut or accelerate your journey to being able to have confidence in your style and being able to have perspective on your value and what you uniquely bring to the world, it's not just go out and shoot more. It's take responsibility for being considerate and thoughtful about your images and choosing them with intention and doing that over and over and over and over again for at least 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. And I think that this goes kind of a little bit back to the film days, because sometimes choosing those great shots that were the great frames, you don't have as much as of a shit to shine ratio. I mean, it's a couple rolls of film and you've got an image. That was 70 shots or 72 shots, maybe 100 at most sometimes. I don't want to get into any industry at all, but I'm watching wedding photographers still who blog and they post like 200 photos from the day. And you're like, well, holy shit, how many are you, A, turning back to your client? And B, how many do you think that other clients want to see before they know that you're the one? Let's do some edits. And I've watched figure photographers. I've watched, rock band photographers. I've watched a lot of people do that. And I think I was really lucky to come from the film day where the less is more. I'll give you 2 images right now, and then maybe I'll give you another 2 later on that kind of let us talk about these 2 again. And that's it. But there's a lot of people who push so much out.
But I have a lot of empathy for that because, there's an attachment to the preciousness of the images, right? Like, when I first review the images, there's a couple of things that happen. Sometimes I'm completely disappointed with every single frame because I had an idea of what I was going to get from that session, and I'm not seeing it. But often what happens is that I'm subjectively attached to images because, remember that, and and this, and and that. And so it's very, very challenging to be objective enough to edit your images that relentlessly. And I think that takes time and practice. But I think the most dangerous time is if you're trying to be a fine art or a decor photographer and you are showing 7 images from the same concept shoot, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
So definitely,
variety is one thing, yes.
Right?
I'm sorry.
I sound like my mom. Well, I sound like all my photography students or teachers. Less is more. Less is more. The fewer images you show, the better photographer you look like.
Yeah.
Like it's extraordinary. It's kind of like aperture. It's like the opposite of what you think it's supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. To that number versus final images. When I was in Vancouver and we worked together, my life in Vancouver, what I produce there is totally different than what I do here, which is, kind of why I was interested in talking to you. And it gets to kind of that, that other part of our talk where, careers shift, and they shift sometimes on a dime and they shift drastically. But that for me, openness and that foundation to, wanting to continue in photography or wanting to continue as an entrepreneur, self-employed, was the thing that really kind of kept me going when I was here. And I was lucky enough to get a call from a magazine that was rebranding themselves, and they had a creative director out of Toronto. And I think, those 2 things, and the luck of me being here after being in Vancouver and having some great images that, believe it or not, sorry?
Some West Coast cachet.
The West Coast cachet. But a lot of the images and a lot of the people in places were images that we took during workshops, or that we had all worked on together, that Wayne had sometimes helped light, that you sometimes informed. And those were the images that then started to push the editorial career out here. And to speak about the number of images to shots, because that's really what it's going down to, the magazine really wanted 15 shots per story. And that's out of 600-700. And I had to really take into consideration. Sometimes I didn't know the story a lot of times. So I was taking into consideration, a little bit of the creative back and forth with the creative director, Sabine, trying to figure out what image would fit the best. It's been 3 years now, and it's been great, but I'm now getting the stories. Well, I was getting the stories pre-photo shoot. COVID has kind of shifted that a little bit. But being your own editor is a very difficult thing. And when I started to make that shift coming here and thinking about that, there's a lot of inspirational stuff online, and there's a lot of entrepreneurial talk and creative talk, and there's Creative Live. You were inspired by Chase Jarvis a lot as well. But when it gets down to editing your own images, there's not a lot of fucking help out there. It just kind of gets down to you looking at your images and killing your babies, as we say in the world, and trying to choose the best. Do you have a place that you have gone for that inspiration to kind of make those cuts, to kind of go, my images are meeting this kind of level? Are there publications out there? Is there a website? Is there several?
I really would love to send some resources and share that with the listeners. I have to say, though, the key pieces of my journey were really, so James Emler.
Yes.
James Emler talked about positioning statements for portfolios.
Okay.
And having a really clear positioning statement for what am I editing for is super, super helpful. So, for example, I do a lot of travel. One of the things that I love about entrepreneurship is I can create my whole life the way that I want it. So I create my life with travel, usually a couple of months every year. And so when I travel, I shoot a whole bunch of images. And some of those images are really great for slideshows with my mom. Some of those images are really great for, the really powerful individual images that could create in my street photography portfolio. And some of those images are iconic travel landscape images. And some of those images, so if I go and I look at that whole couple of body of work, and I'm trying to edit, if I have to be clear on what I'm editing for. Am I editing for my fine art? I'm noticing a little bit of echo. Hang on 1 second. I'm just going to see if this. No, I don't have the right headphones. Sorry. I'll try again. So, considering what am I editing that shoot for? Am I editing it so that I have images to go into my fine art motion collection? Am I editing for street photography? So often I'll go through a shoot or a session and I'll do one edit for this body for her collection, and then I'll do a second edit for this other body. And there's sometimes overlap. So I think the critical thing, and I think the thing that's so hard, and when I'm doing like private Lightroom sessions or I'm coaching other photographers on their actual creative expression, is what is this group of images supposed to be about and for? And when you can really be mindful of that. So if you're shooting for a client, like when you're shooting for that story, not having the story is hard.
Yeah.
When you have the story, then you can shoot and edit specifically for that story. Yeah. And you may use totally different images for your own personal thoughts from that same shoot. So James Emler, when I was in photography school, he was one of the people that gave me that tool. And I would say the second thing was that I hang out with really excellent photographers and image makers. And so when I am able to show a body of work, I'm going to get really high caliber critique and feedback. And I think that for a lot of emerging photographers who are relying on feedback from social media, and even from some of the groups on Facebook that are supposed to be curated groups,
Yes.
I think you're doing yourself a service by not being super intentional about where you're getting your feedback from.
All right. I just want to be clear about that because you cut out. But disservice is what Aura said. It's a disservice. And this touches a little bit on what Puya said as well. And he said the reason why he's really good is because he's always surrounded himself with people that are better. And I think that's what, in essence, Vancouver Photo Workshops was. It was a school that, even if it wasn't the 5 of us who taught there or the 8 of us who taught there on a regular basis, we were bringing in other photographers that were world class. And I hate to say it, but in the social media world of today, people don't like to hear that somebody is better than them. And they generally don't want to hear critique. They don't generally look for honest critique. And even if they're looking for it, they don't know where to get that correct critique.
That's my point, is that I will give photographers the benefit of the doubt and say, I think that the people who are actually out there looking for genuine critique and feedback aren't likely to find it on the internet. There's
Right.
a few places, and I can't remember the names, and if I do, I'll send you some links, but there are a few places. There's one for sure that an art director for DDB Canada sent me a link, and he said, this person does really great reviews and critiques. And I don't remember what it was. If I can find it, I'll get it. But again, it's about being intentional with where you're getting your feedback and your critiques
Exactly.
from. Because really, when I'm putting together a body of work or a portfolio, or I'm selecting images to show, narrowing it down is tough to do.
Yeah.
So I rely on the feedback of my colleagues and peers who I have created relationships with and who I reach out to with intention because of their expertise. And I think that that's really challenging. We have the challenge of instant gratification with being able to make an image without any consideration. You can do it without any consideration, and the pre-thinking part of photography is starting to be dissipated, and then you're adding that to the feedback and critique. It's the lowest common denominator. My own personal work, suffered when I did almost a year and a half of teaching introduction and intermediate photography classes without taking any classes myself or workshops, because all of the work I saw was student level work, really good student level work, but all of the work I saw was student level work. So I didn't get challenged or inspired to create higher level work during that time. And it was when I really noticed how important having quality, intentional critique and feedback really is.
And how do personal projects then play into that?
Same areas. So my life is a personal project.
I like that.
Business model strategies is to have somebody else pay for my education. So whenever possible, I want to get paid to learn something. So I want to get paid to travel around the world. I want to get paid to learn how to teach. I want to get paid to learn how to photograph. I want to get paid to do it. So, anything I'm doing personally is probably a project that I'm putting out there. My own personal projects, I didn't really draw the line between my process or approach to personal work versus paid work. My approach was pretty much the same. I have 3 sort of metrics that I decide whether or not I'm going to do something, and one of them is fine. And you have to have 2 out of 3.
Okay.
So
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
2 out of 3 ain't bad. So number 1. But I'd be proud to tell my mother about it.
That's a good metric.
So I mean, a lot of my work is nude and figure work. A lot of my work was pushing the boundary in human body and juxtaposition between texture and human body and contortion and space and a lot of really push the boundary, push the edge kind of work. And my mom's a pretty open-minded person.
Yes.
So it's not really just my mom, but it's the idea of, if I were to look at this 20 years from now, would I still be proud to have made it? It gets back to, is this the voice that I want to be putting out into the world? So is my mom going to be happy?
Yeah.
And there's work that I've done that I won't show my mother because it's 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Financially, is it just too lucrative to give up? Like, if you pay me enough money, I won't show it to my mother.
Fair.
But it can't just be a financial win. If it's not, it has to have one other aspect. So the third thing in that is creatively fulfilling or challenging. So if it's a really cool creative project and I can show it to my mom, but I don't make a ton of money, I'm still going to jump in and do it as a personal project. So I always had it as so my personal projects are just the ones where I answered but didn't get the finances from it. Everything I do has that same approach.
I think those metrics are really interesting because this is something that over the 5 years of me returning to Ontario, having 2 little girls in my life, and my wife and being married, these are metrics that have shifted, because now the thing is how do I explain a lot of this to my daughters? Where is my voice for that? What does that do for them? I want it to empower them, but I mean, I'm looking back on some of that work, and some of that work, like you say, it's pretty, it is nude, it's figure work, and some of it is edgy into that line of fetish. Now, how do you approach that? And these are the things that, for me, I have been sitting down over the last 3 and 4 years. I've shot 1 nude session in the last 5 years. And that's an extreme difference than what I was doing in Vancouver. Everything here is pretty commercial. It's pretty editorial for me. And even trying to get into the art world, it's a smaller city, so you also as a model don't have that anonymity. And due to my own circumstances, Detroit really isn't my market to go out and shoot into, unless they kind of come over here. So, it has shifted a lot of the way that I'm thinking photography, not only my family, but geography and where I'm at, and my age, because we're getting up there. But it does allow you this opportunity to look back and think about what you've created, the voice you have with your camera, and what you want to do with it. And the thing over the last couple of years that I was also really inspired by and kind of watching a little bit at arm's length is that you've moved from doing photography full time to kind of discussing that creative call and entrepreneurship with other people. So explain a little bit of that just to kind of catch us up to where we are.
Well, I think that it comes from the idea of the idea of really using my creativity to create whatever life that I want. And so while photography has always been a huge part of my self-expression, I've also kind of pursued the idea of teaching or some other way of being able to give back or to give my expertise in some way. I mean, that is how we connected, is that there was this combination of wanting to build the school, and we built the curriculum and we were really instrumental in wanting to create this duality of, I'm going to do photography and then I'm going to support the next generation of photographers, and I'm going to continue to give back through my craft. And doing that with photography for a long time was really satisfying. And what I started to notice over time was that there was this huge gap in terms of, we were really supporting photographers to master their craft, but in supporting the mastery of the commerce or the business of it. I mean, you said it even in your fine art, bachelor's degree or bachelor's, master's, bachelor's degree.
Bachelor's. Bachelor's, yeah.
Yeah, that you didn't get a lot of business. In my full-time professional photography program course that I took, we had 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We had 36 hours of business training to set us up to be self-employed. And that gap for where we're just not supporting creatives with really good business and marketing skills and the mindset of entrepreneurship started to really kind of get under my skin. And I know that because I have this really unique background of having been a financial accountant, having been in marketing, and also being a photographer and being a creative, is that I can speak that language. I can help people understand business. And the other piece of it is, and I think that we're right up against it right now in terms of what's happening in our economy, is that if you try to apply 20th century business models, it's like this generic, geriatric way of doing business that does not support today's economy. Today's economy is dynamic, it's flexible, things are changing quickly. And as photographers, our passion and self-expression evolves and changes. We need to be supported with a dynamic, flexible business model that will actually use, that will help us guide our decisions, but not restrict or limit our creative self-expression. And so when I started to see this more and more and more, that's when I shifted into business coaching. And then I realized that I could do more good and help more people if I actually had an online platform where I can really support people to design, build, and grow their creative businesses. So that's kind of the journey for me. It was out of a desire to support creatives where they're just not being supported.
How many of the problems or the pitfalls that they run into are similar to the ones that you felt in photography? How many of those run parallel to your own career?
Oh, exactly the same. So quite specifically, so right now we're in the middle of a pandemic and people are talking about pivot. And I'm here to tell you, like, it's all the same challenges. It's very, very similar challenges. We went through the recession in 2008.
Yeah.
Our industry was one of the industries that was most disrupted by technology in 2000 with the dawn of digital photography. Yes. Like, completely changed our industry, like totally.
Yep.
And yet, if you look at the challenges we face, it's how do we manage our time to be more efficient? How do we feel confident in the value of our pricing? How do we communicate what we are doing to the world through marketing communications? How do we set up our business so that we're not as impacted by the ebbs and flows of a gig economy and we can actually plan vacations?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same things. It's the same questions. It's the same challenges. And, you know, I'm a member of a professional association, and there's people that are in business 20, 30 years. We have the same questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's extraordinary to me. It has a different bow on it. It has a different package. Maybe we're going to realign, but it's the same.
But it's all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting, and the time we're in is very interesting. And you do hear a lot of people, you know, like you say, there's, the other thing with what I've done when I've moved to Windsor is I've moved into doing video, and I've moved into doing like social media support for business organizations that are trying to improve business in areas of the city here. And there's a lot of them that are trying to figure out what to do right now. And my only thing to say to them is like, you should be worried about your clients. You should be worried about a real authentic message. Don't make things that like something that they aren't right now, and just wait and hold on. And it's a crazy thing to tell people who feel like they need to work. But I also kind of come back to this Canadian kind of artist approach to it is we used to be snowed in for 6 months. We're used to just being nose to the grindstone.
And I'm over here on the West Coast. We've had sunshine and daffodils for months. Nothing about snow.
That's fair. That's fair. Maybe it's an Ontario kind of thing. But
I agree with you. There was a really great interview on PPA with Mike Mckay recently, and like anything else, like any of the other ebbs and flows and blips and bubs in terms of the photography industry. I mean, we were really freaked out in the 2000s that all these digital newbies were going to come and steal our jobs. Yeah. And some of them did, but it wasn't like, here's the thing. there's always going to be attrition. There's always going to be photographers that are not going to weather the storm of hard times in economy. And there are going to be ones that do weather the storm. And the ones that can weather the storm are going to have more work because there's going to be less competition.
Yeah, perseverance is a...
So the message that I'm saying people should be sending is, hey, clients, just want to let you know that I'm going to weather this storm and I'm going to be here for the end of it. In the meantime, let me know how I can support you.
One of the exact sentences I sent to a client was, don't worry, we have your back when all this comes through. Like,
Yeah.
that's really all there is to it. Everybody's got to kind of hold on. And
I will say that to tie it into to sort of general life, in my couple of decades of being a creative entrepreneur and in teaching and in serving and supporting and coaching and training other creatives, it has become abundantly clear that people do not hire photographers as a service because of your photography.
Yeah. Yep. People hire people based
They're
on...
not hiring for your images.
No.
That's a given. It's everything else about the way you do business, the way you serve them, and who you show up as that will cause you to get hired as a photographer for service. Now, it's different when we're talking about fine art and product and things like that, and that's why I keep saying it's photography as a service. But yeah. I've had shoots where I show up and nobody has even seen the back of the camera, and they're saying, you're such a great photographer.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't know that. I'm just a great service provider. So that what I think a lot of photographers miss is that if my photography is good, that's good enough to be in business. And it's just not. It's a very small piece of being successful in the business of photography.
Yeah, one of the things that we had to say so many times when you were teaching people is there may be people out there who are less talented than you making more money. And that's because they're either great to work with, they understand their business, but sometimes photography is the job, or that final product isn't the most important thing with them. It's sometimes a longevity, a relationship. It's the advice that they even get on set. It's the stuff that I was talking with Puya about having a team that you can lean on when you have a question and you feel confident that you're getting the right answer and the right push in the right direction. Similar to what you were saying with James Emler, or finding those people that will help you critique your own visual work. So with your business shifting, last question, we'll do this. Where do you find some of your inspiration for where you're going now with your business and your coaching?
Some days you have to look real hard under a lot of rocks to find inspiration, because there's a wearing down that I am feeling in 20 plus years into entrepreneurship. There's some fatigue that sets in. So the inspiration and the motivation is really critical. And where I look is I look inward. I look for my own meaning and why I love to do it. And I remember early on in photography when people would say, well, what do you love photographing the most? Well, why do you love it? And I could not articulate that for the life of me. I love photographing. I just love all photography. The act of photographing was great. And articulating why I loved it or why it was important to me and the meaning behind it was really challenging. And I would say that the work that I've done to get more aware and to practice talking about why things matter means that when, it's a dark day and there's nothing happening, I can go back to and look at, oh yeah, this is why I'm going to get out of bed and do something today. And the final thing I would say about where I get my inspiration from is that I'm not one of those, think about it in advance, look at other people's work. That's not where I'm at in my career anymore. Where I get inspiration from is I have to just start. I just have to start. If I have the camera in I just have to push the button. Taking that first photograph gets me into motion. And then I can look at that image and go, oh, what what could I do to transform this? What could I do to make this more impactful? What is it that I'm actually trying to say with this image? And as I get into the inquiry and the curiosity about the creation of an image, then I am outside of the shoulda, woulda, coulda, couldas. I'm not overwhelmed by technology. I'm in the process of creation, and I have to just start to get there.
That's awesome. I like losing time in creation. That's when you know that process is the right journey you should be on, your creative process. It's great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I thank you so much for spending the time. And it's been...
It's so great to chat with you. We haven't chatted in so long.
which is why these conversations end up going longer than they probably should. But yeah, I do thank you. And anything that you have that, you know, is information that you want to send along, I'll just tag it in either, you know, the posts or the description. It's definitely there. So Aura, again, thank you very much. And we'll say goodbye then.
I really, really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to walk down memory lane, to really consider, you know, the journey that I have been on and the choices that I've made, and to be able to share that with people. I really appreciate it. It's been a while since I've had an opportunity to really talk about it. So thanks for that. And thanks for bringing this out to people, to give them some perspective on what people's journeys have been like. So thanks.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
I really want to thank Aura for taking all the time that she actually did for that interview, a little bit longer than we normally go. It's great to catch up with old friends and see what they're doing, but also kind of recount our history, think about where we've come from, and think about how those things have affected us as creatives and people kind of all the way through. So thanks, Aura. Thanks again to Vancouver Photo Workshops for all the great memories. This series of discussions is brought to you by Pretty in the Algorithm, a curious content creation company helping you connect with your audience and with each other.